Welcome everyone to another session Data with Nikk the Greek. And today we finally get started with Delta Lake hands-on. So I'm gonna show you how to install Delta Lake locally for the reason just to show you that those technologies can also be used locally and not necessarily depend on a cloud provider, even though a cloud provider makes things easier. And of course, I'm gonna show you how you save your first Delta Lake table and how to load it. And if you haven't heard about Delta Lake until now, please check this link above. I gave a ramp up video there, so check it out to find out what Delta Lake and the Lakehouse concept is all about. And with this information, let's get started and deep dive into Delta Lake. Installing Delta Lake is actually quite easy if you have installed Spark. So if you haven't installed Spark yet, check the video here above in the link. They're gonna give you very detailed instruction how to set up Spark locally. Once you have installed Spark, you just need to do two things. You have to check out which version of Spark you have. So I added here also a link where you can find a mapping table between the Delta version and, okay, I'm in the mirror, so you can see, for instance, with Spark 3.4x, I can use those, only 2.4. If I have a very old version of Spark, for instance, 3.1, I can use Delta 1.0. So you see also Delta Lake has quite some history already. And so once you know your version, let's go back to the PowerPoint, you just do a pip install Delta Spark 3.10 with your chosen version. So in my case, let's go to the CMD. I gonna activate my conda environment. Activate PySpark minus 3.1. Okay, you see that my conda environment already is called by the version which I have. So for instance, you can just run PySpark and it should show you your version as well. So here we can see 3.51. That means we have to install Delta Lake 3.1. Let's open another session. Conda activate PySpark minus 3.1, and then we just do pip install Delta minus Spark. Yes, equals 3.10. Of course, I have already installed it, so it says it's satisfied. That's pretty much it for the installation. Okay, now let's finally get to the code. So, as always, we first of all have to set up our Spark session, and that's where it gets a little bit different. So first of all, we need to import PySpark SQL Spark session, and from Delta, we have to import config Spark with Delta pip, and sometimes you also use Delta table. That's not relevant for the Spark session, but later for some executions. So then the most important part for the Spark session, I also added here the ramp up video. So there you can also, or ramp up link that you can also get those information out as well, are those two configurations. So first of all, you have to set up the Spark extension. And then there is something called a catalog. It's similar to a Hive meta store, just in the Spark session. And here you have some different configurations based on Delta Lake. So those two things are needed. And once you add those configurations, you now will not use get or create directly on your Spark session builder, but you use configure Spark with Delta pip based on your builder, and then do you get or create to your Spark session. So let's execute that. Oh, okay, we haven't imported the imports. And that's all you need regarding your Spark session. So you're ready. Now let's do some tests. So we have two tables we want to fill, a Delta table and a Parquet table, just to see the difference. So the path is data Delta test and Parquet test. And now the first thing what we're doing is with SDF Spark range, we basically generate one data frame with one column, which is ID. That's what range is doing from value 1 until 6, meaning 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 can be the value saved. And what we're doing is we are saving it as Parquet and Delta using override. Override wouldn't make a difference because it's the first time you're writing the table. So let's wait a few seconds. And now let's also read both of them. And we can see that the data is exactly the same. And then we have the ID column 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So, but let's have a look what happened here in the storage. So Parquet you probably already know. So the most important file is this one. There's a success file and those are some check files. So we have here one Parquet file, and with delta we have exactly the same thing, except of it we don't have a success file, but we have a CSC and a Parquet file. That's an important part. And what we have additionally is just a delta log. This we're gonna check out in another session in detail. So now we want to append data. So let's see what's happening here. So we can also see that we now appended, just to check, so we append now number 6 to 10, and we can also see exactly the same. And now let's have a look what happened in our data. So first Parquet, we can see now a second part has been added. Yeah, that's probably 727. And if you're gonna go to delta, we can see exactly the same thing, 727. A second Parquet table has been added. So now that's where delta becomes interesting. Now I want to do an override and not an append on delta and Parquet with the numbers 1 to 7. So let's do that. Let's also load the data. We can see numbers 1 to 7 have been added, and let's check out Parquet. Yeah, probably saw the result on delta already. So here we have one single file because we had an override. So it's only the numbers 1 to 7. But in delta, you suddenly have 3 files. That means if you override a delta table, it's not overwriting everything like in a Parquet table. But we talked before, it provides you some history. So, and that's pretty much it, what you should be aware of. The table state. So if you load the table, it's based on the log. It just says, okay, the current state is load Parquet table or file with a specific ID. That's pretty much it. All your files in the background gonna stay. And that's something we're gonna see in a bit, also by loading a historic table. So, but let's first of all still stay with the creation of delta tables. So now we have our Parquet table. And what we can very easily do with this command is convert an existing Parquet table into a delta table. And what happens in the background is actually quite easy. It just creates the log. That's the only difference which we already just observed. That means now I can load a Parquet or a Parquet directory with a format delta. So let's see if it fails. There it works. And let's also see what happened in the background. Here we have, here we have our delta log. That's pretty much the whole difference. Now we can also do the other way around. We can load data as Parquet, because you saw behind the delta directory there's only a Parquet table. So now, of course, that's exactly what we don't want. In another session, I'm gonna show you how to do it correctly. You would use a vacuum to clean up all the files not needed anymore. We're gonna have a whole session for that. But basically here you see that we have the history in there, and now we have a lot of duplicated values. Because we had the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's the override we did, but then we had also the first two writes and appends which we did. So those data are still there in the delta table. Now I want to show you, before we buckle up this basic session, two things. So one thing is you can use this command to check all the details of your delta table. So you generate a delta table and then or delta table instance and then a detail. And you can see an ID of the delta table, some description you can add, the location, when it was created, when it was last modified. Then of course you can partition, you can see the number of files, the number of active files to be very correct, the size in bytes, and this is some metadata which you already can see quite easily. Then there's something called also the I can move myself. Okay. The max reader version. So there's also a link for that. Basically, what Delta is doing, they have, of course, very new features. But now append and override is a very old feature, meaning based on the reader version, you can define which Delta version basically can read from a Delta table. So if you use newer features, older Delta versions might not be able to read. Here we have reader version 1, so you need at least version 1, which is a very old Delta version, which can also read those tables to read this table. And let me, so this link here, so you can find here all the newest features when they came out. And here you can see the writer version, reader version. So the same counts also for writing. If you need min-write version 2, you're gonna need at least a version which is also capable um, to read this table. But that's something also I would like to deep dive into the table properties later, just for you to understand what we actually saw. So, and then the last thing, which is important, is the history. So let's have a look into the history. So what you can see here is exactly what we did with the data table. So we had our initial write using override, then we had our append, um, and then we had our second override again. And what's also interesting here, you can also get some operation metrics. So for instance, the number of files which we have written, as we had a very small file and partition based on one, we have one. It also gives you the number of rows which we have written and also the number of bytes which we have written, which is pretty cool information for you, for your auditing, which Delta quite easily supports, as you see here. So another thing is also, let's say we want to load an older version. So if we want to see, because we still have the Parquet files and the JSON just maps the Parquet files from the logging table of Delta, we can just load our old version. We can load our second version where we had just added the append, and then our current version, which you can see also above, is 7. And probably if you're gonna try another one, it's gonna fail because this version doesn't exist. And with this, let's shortly summarize what we learned. So we learned how to override and append a table. Then we learned how to check the details of the table and the history. So using delta table for path, and then detail or the history command. We learned how to transform a Parquet table. It's a little bit weird how they're doing it, into a delta table using the Parquet dot command. It's basically a catalog command, roughly said. And then we also learned how to read a table, either with an option version off to load a specific version, or you just let the option away and you load the whole data. And with this, thanks a lot for this video. I hope you enjoyed the first ramp up hands-on into Delta. And don't forget to subscribe to stay tuned with more videos about Delta, Lake, and Spark. See you soon.